Okay, this is my boat game. This is it running. This is the textures and the textures on the water, skybox, and buoys, and also my start and finish line. Um, this is me going around the track that I've made. I've made it so that you go up to this this end buoy here. You go around that buoy, and then you go back to the finish line, and this is done through acceleration and deceleration. And so as you can see with my speedometer at the top, it increases when you go faster, and as you slow down or let go of the W key, you gradually slow down. Okay, so in this first section, this is the function I use to write my font. I use the bitmap string so that it takes the 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 font from of Times New Roman in my case for my speedometer, and then this section prints out the string for Times New Roman, and in this section we make the speedometer equal to the acceleration. Uh, then we take the string and call it temp and turn the speedometer into a string using toString. Uh, and then we create a string which equals speed equals, and then the speedometer or the temp from the variable before. Then we use a char pointer in the new char to generate a char the size of speedo1, and then we use from the start of speedo, it copies the value of the memory location that the pointer is pointing at, and does this for the length of speedo. For this section, that's the raster position of the boat is the boat X plus 12 plus the boat position. That sets the color. And then the right bitmap string is the glut bitmap times the Roman 24, and then set to the pointer that we declared earlier, the char pointer, so that it sets the text to the string of the acceleration, and then increases and decreases with the acceleration string. In this next section, it's the texturing. So we use 5 textures or 4 textures, I believe, and so I create and then I set the image 0 to the bitmap of water, and the texture is there. And then I bind the texture to the variable that I created earlier called texture. So bind 0 to the texture 0. I then specify the image data in the GL texture image 2D, and set all the variables so that it is the first texture. I then wrap the texture to the parameters 2D texture wrap and GL nearest, so it's nearest to you. The water is the only one that I use linear mid-map linear for in the parameters, and that's because the further away you look, it looks nicer in the water. It just naturally it looks cleaner. It doesn't look so grainy. And then I copy and paste that for each of the textures so that I can texture each object. So to enable the texture, I use GL enable texture 2D, and then bind texture 2 in this case for the start of my start line, which would make it a wooden start line. And then further down, in my startup, I generate the 4 textures. It was 4. I then load the external textures to load them. I set the texturing to modular so that I can use my texturing and my lighting rather than just my textures. I then enable the depth test so that you've got the depth of it so it looks 3D, and then I also enable the lighting, and this is where I call all my functions. Okay, so for the lighting, I create 5 variables for each of my objects that use color and ambient, color and diffuse, color and specular, shine and immersion. And then I create one of those. I create one of those for each of my objects. So in this case, I've got boat amp, buoy amp, and water amp. So for my boat, my buoys, and my water, they'll all have lighting effects on them, so it will look neater and nicer when the game comes to run. And then see here where it says my boat amp, I then call them and set the materials for each of them to so for like ambient, I set my boat ambient variable, and then it'll call that variable and use those values that I set for each of these textures and materials, and then it attaches itself to the boat. Come on. And then if I scroll a bit further down, say to my water, I will show you the exact same code, but yeah, there you go, the exact same code for my water as my boat, using the exact same functions. This is how I made my boat. So to make it different from everything else in the scene, I set the color to garish color, as you saw in the video. I rotated my boat to face forward, so I rotated it 90 degrees on the Z-axis so that it faced forward, not the awkward angle I coded it in. To make the boat, I used Vec 3s at 0, 7, 0. So those first 3 make a triangle, and then all the ones you add after that make up the triangle strip in a circle for this first section, as you can see in my image next to it. It shows my design for like it all curving around, and then that last bit there is the back of the boat, and all the numbers on the side correspond with the numbers in the diagram, and those numbers then correspond with the bottom of the strip as well. So as you can see there, I've numbered them the same as the top of the strip, so that when drawing it out, it all connected nicely and fit correctly onto my scene. Okay, so for my polygons, I used push GL bind polygon to create all of my polygons, and everything else in my scene is now a polygon. The problem with this is I didn't use functions or classes to like set my objects, and this made it so that my code was so long that it was just like most people for this who used textures and functions and classes found it a lot easier, whereas I had to write each individual line step by step each time, in the way that I've shown in my diagram next to you with that code is written over 1,000 times, all to do the same thing, all to make squares and squares on top of squares. And if I show you one of my polygons, here you go, polygon 3, or boys 3, sorry, it's 12 of the same code written so that it makes the squares with the rectangles as you see in my game. Again, if I were to do this again, I would probably end up not writing it out all individually, and I would write it all in classes and functions to make my life easier and reduce the amount of code that I had. But from what I've created, it sets each individual location, and I like this because it makes everything exactly where I want it to be. Again, I could have done this with classes and functions, but I like how I've set this all out. It looks nice to me. It's just the way I like to do it. Well, it's not the way I like to do it. I'd prefer to do it a different way, but it's the way it worked well for me. It ended up working out which is not good. But again, if I were to do it again, I would change it. Here's my references. Thank you for watching.